After e4, c5 and d4, black takes the pawn. White doesn't have to play the gambit, the Smith-Morra Gambit through c3 only. There's another move he can play, which is knight f3 to attack the pawn. And this is some sort of transposition. I mean, c3 can come afterwards anyway. This is now starting an attack on the pawn d4 immediately. So black needs to play e5. This pawn is supporting d4, and this knight cannot take the pawn in e5 because queen a5 check, and white loses a piece. So after e5, white can now play c3, and this is a proper Smith-Morra situation. But in this case, we don't take the pawn in c3, because if we did take the pawn, then this wouldn't be a transposition into the way we're supposed to play against the Smith-Morra Gambit, because we have a pawn in e5, and we have a backward pawn in d7, and white's position is better. Yeah, white is down a pawn, but this is not the setup that we should play against it, because as we noticed during the Smith-Morra, we take the pawn in d4 and then the pawn in c3 and then knight takes back. Then we're going to play moves like e6, a6, b5. So we will play with the e4 against e6 type of structure. And so if we have a pawn in e5, that's a different thing. So in this situation, after c3, black continues with knight c6. And now, well, there's plenty of options. We're going to go through all of them, like bishop c4, which is some sort of Italian, bishop b5 even. So let's go through pawn takes, because now the white player has got the number of attackers enough to go to d4, and also because this will isolate the pawn in d7. Black now, well, white has two pieces attacking e5, and so the best move is pawn takes d4, and after knight takes back, black continues with knight f6. So black has an isolated pawn and equal material. So what's the plan we're going to go through right now? White is not interested in taking the knight in c6 because that will help black to unite the pawns. So after knight c3, what's our plan now? We're going to use the pressure of the knight in e4 to pin the knight in c3 with the bishop and go for the weak pawn in e4. We want to take this knight and isolate the pawn of the white player. So here we're going to look at three options. Knight to b5 in order to keep the knight, protecting the knight. Bishop c4, typical Smith-Morra move. Well, bishop d3 is not possible because there's a knight attacking in d4, so the knight will be hanging. And bishop e2 just doesn't put any protection to the e4 square. So, and then we're also going to look at the third option, which is knight takes knight, which allows potentially bishop d3 in the future. Let's start with bishop c4. Now black takes the knight in c3, breaks up the pawn structure, and now black can take the pawn in e4. You might think that this is just falling into a pin, but that's not a problem. Queen e2, and now black castles. The queen cannot take the knight because of rook e8. But let's go through this line because it's very interesting. Queen takes knight is actually possible because rook e8 comes with the possibility of the white player to play knight e6 or bishop e6. Best move is knight to e6, attacking the queen. And now if we take with the rook, then bishop takes back, then the white player isn't losing at all. So now black continues with the best move, d5. So this is a fork now. Well, if knight takes queen, then rook takes queen, queen comes with check. And after bishop blocks, otherwise the bishop will stay hanging. The bishop blocks, the knight can take back. And now the position is slightly better for black. Black has survived the opening and it's going through an endgame that looks good. Well, the bishop is pinned, so the white player cannot really castle. The development of the dark square bishop through the fianchetto is not very good. This is blocked by a pawn at the moment. So king d2 isn't making it good for white. So the best move is bishop to e3, which develops and also allows the white king to castle. Black now continues playing the most accurate moves in order to go until a winning endgame, rook a4. This is just to assume that so far white has played the best moves. computer moves literally. So after finally castling, black continues with b6. The only thing that white has to do now is finish the development, develop the rooks. So after, let's say, well, these moves, and we don't know that these moves are going to happen for real, but of course these are the best moves. It only makes sense to transfer the rook from the f file, which is behind a pawn, to the d file, for example. So the rook is attacking the pawn and is developing, is going on open file. Now black continues with bishop e6. So after building this pawn chain like this, in order to make sure this bishop doesn't become any annoying, black now develops the bishop, and also the rook in the fourth rank controls that this pawn doesn't advance anywhere. And the best move by white now, this is still to assume that black will play computer moves, is bishop to f3. Even then we're prepared. We can play rook to c8, finish the development. We're targeting this pawn, we're advancing our pieces and entering our opponent territory. So white has two pieces attacking the pawn in d5, yet this pawn shouldn't really be taken, although that is one of the best moves. Well, bishop to d4 is stopping the attack of the rook in order to defend the pawn in c3, and putting a rook under the pawn in c3 to defend it is silly, not to mention that in this specific situation it loses a pawn. So after bishop takes and rook takes, looks like white safely won a pawn, because we can't really take the pawn in c3 without the rook taking the knight in the back rank. So black continues with knight to e6, saving the back rank for the moment and keeping the attack on the pawn in c3. And now black will just have to play accurate and exploit the weakness that we've created on the opponent territory, which is this isolated pawn. Black has got nothing to worry in the pawn structure and has got more advanced rooks. So let's remember that this rook in a1 cannot really defend the pawn in c3, because there's a rook that can be taken, there's a pawn that can be taken. And so after rook to d3, only way to protect the pawn, if white wants to try and keep that pawn alive, black plays rook to a3, furthering the attack on the pawn, and also still attacking a2. So after bishop to d2, especially also because bishop to d4, the white player might not want to go through the challenge of the knight, obviously. So black continues with knight c5, attacking the rook, and then rook to e3 in order to stay on the same rank of this pawn is met by f6. Black now has nothing else to worry when it comes to the back rank threats and is ready to get the king out. So now after bishop c1, best move by white, attacking the rook goes back to a4. Black continues with the idea of knight to b3, which should be able to secure black the win. Besides, black's got ideas of knight and rooks finally taking the pawn in c3 and exploiting this majority against the minority on the queen side later on. So let's make a recap of this knight f3 Smith-Morra variation. After e5 we said that the knight can't take the pawn because the queen will win the knight. After c3 and knight c6, pawn takes, knight takes. Now we play knight f6. And after knight to c3, we play bishop to b4, exploiting the fact that this pawn is e4 is a loose pawn, and we're pinning the knight. We mentioned bishop c4, and we still have one more line to go through in the bishop c4 variation. So bishop c4, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes, queen e2, and now we can castle. The queen can't take the knight because after rook e8, knight e6, and now we can play d5. So earlier we went through knight takes queen. Let's quickly mention that bishop takes pawn in d5 is met by bishop takes in e6. And now the bishop cannot take the bishop because rook takes back in e6 will come with the deadly pin. So now this game is lost for white, because whatever white does, we still have a discovered attack, a discovered pin. So that's not possible. And again, in this position, queen takes is met by queen f6. We're still pinning the knight, we're avoiding the swap of queens, and we're also threatening the square c3 with a deadly attack. So the knight can't move, and what happens if white castles? Then bishop takes knight with an attack on the queen. And so when the queen moves either to c5 or maybe to d3, let's say d3 comes with an attack of knight e5, double attack on the bishop. This wins the game because black wins a piece. And if the queen goes to, I don't know, c5, then the queen can take the pawn in c3, pinning the bishop. The bishop can't take without dropping the queen. And in this situation, after bishop takes, we saw how queen d3 is not possible, queen c5 is not possible. What happens after queen b5? It looks like in this case we cannot make a fork of the knight in e5, neither we can take in c3 or something. We need to play a6, still attacking the queen. And now the queen can't really leave the bishop alone, because queen takes b7, then the bishop will be able to take the bishop in c4, and the queen is defending the knight in c6. So now if the queen goes to a4 to keep an eye on the bishop, this runs into b5. And if the queen goes to b3, this runs into knight a5. And now we have two attackers over the bishop, and we're going to win the piece. So back at this position, after bishop b4, what happens if white player plays knight to b5, which protects the knight, and so in this way it safeguards the white player from the problem of getting an isolated pawn. And besides, when the knight takes back, it will be protecting e4. Now black continues with castling. The idea is obviously to play rook e8. So after a3 attacking the bishop, surprisingly we have to take the knight. And now white takes back, and the reason why we did that is because our bishop was provoked and we took knight takes back, and so we are forcing the white player to play moves that go backwards. Now black is up in development because after rook e8 we have a lot of attack over e4. So what is the white player gonna do? Well, he can play bishop d3, for example, to protect the pawn. Now black puts more pressure with d5, and the pawn can't really go forward. d5 would have come anyway, even if white had developed something else. Best move by white now is the castle. Best by black is this move, d4. We're not interested in taking the pawn, but rather d4 is a better move because we're producing a passed pawn. So, well, knight d5 is not possible because we have two attackers. And so after knight to e2, black can finally take the pawn in e4, but now we keep our passed pawn alive. So now it's white to move. We're not going to look at moves like bishop takes, so that's really the worst. You can play, the white player didn't sacrifice the development by playing knight to b5 in order to protect knight c3 and making a backward move, just so he could give us, just so he could keep the bishop pair and then give it back to us again. It doesn't make any sense. We're going to play only the best moves. So the best move is knight to g3. We're going to look at knight g3 and also queen to c2. Queen to c2 seems to me to be making sense because it's allowing the development of the rook on the open file and the file the opening queen. It's developing another piece and it's putting more attack over the e4 square, so it's creating a threat. So it looks like queen c2 makes perfect sense. It's also attacking an open file, but this is met by bishop f5, defending the knight. And it's not like black is completely crashing here, but black's position is better. Remember that this is when this passed pawn is our key to victory, and in this line white should not be playing through this line, and because simply black has a favorable endgame. After the best move, which is f3, black continues with knight d6, and there's pressure on this knight, so a bunch of swaps like bishop takes then eventually will leave black's development better because the rook will be landing in e2. So after f3, knight d6, white will have to give up the bishop pair. Either he will take us, then we take back in a bunch of swaps, and then the rook goes on the second rank and black is just winning, or well, white doesn't take, but then we can take, and then the white player will have zero strength for the endgame because we have a pass pawn and he doesn't even have the bishop pair. So what if instead of f3, which is the best move, what happens after, I don't know, bishop f4? Well, now black continues with rook to c8, and the advantage here, according to the engine, is about like a piece up for the black player. There's an attack on the rook, on the queen, and best suggestion now is to move the queen away. A move like queen to b3, for example, always take into account these kind of moves like knight c5. There's double attack on the bishop and the queen, so that's, we're going to be winning a piece just like we saw before. Black also has ideas to play like knight e5 even, knight b4. These are all possible moves. It depends also a lot on what the white player will do. A move like queen d1 seems to be getting out of trouble, but black just plays queen f6 with the idea of playing knight to c5, and the position of the black player is just much superior. The white rooks are not developed, the black rooks are both on open files. The white player can't really move without losing material, and even if the white player were to swap everything, that will just improve the position of the black's pieces and allow them to enter the second rank, especially the rooks, and black also still has this pass pawn forever. Another move we could have seen as well in such position after the rook goes to c8 is rook to c1, because there will be double attack on the rook in c8, so that could be an idea of the white player. But this also doesn't work because of g5, and this pawn comes with an attack on the bishop. So if bishop takes, then black can take with the queen. It doesn't have to take with the knight, of course, because if we take with the knight, then the bishop will have a double attack on f5. And if bishop goes back, for example, to g3, now we have knight e5, which comes with an attack of the rook on the queen. And of course, queen taking rook doesn't work because the bishop can take back. So after the queen moves, let's say b3, this is met by knight winning the bishop in g3. And now there's two pieces attacking in d3. So if knight takes back in g3, then we have two pieces taking the bishop in d3. And if the bishop takes the bishop in f5, then the knight can take it back.